In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful Podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pepin, and today we're exploring three essential themes: the psychology of peak performance, navigating growth with clarity, and transforming leadership through purpose. My guest is Steve Morris, a former elite yacht designer and certified U.S. Navy project manager who now helps entrepreneurial leaders unlock their highest potential. Steve blends the strategic rigor of the Entrepreneurial Operating System, famously known as EOS, with the inner awareness of positive intelligence to guide leaders through complex business challenges, team dysfunction, and personal plateaus. From leading multi-million-dollar racing team to cultivating a sacred 31-acre farm in Colorado for executive retreats, Steve brings a rare depth of wisdom, clarity, and care to his coaching work. His message is simple yet powerful. The best leaders don't just scale companies, they grow people. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your support helps more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Mr. Steve Morris, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great today, Sam. Thank you very much for having me here.
Well, it's lovely to have you here, and what you're doing in coaching, I think, is something worth hearing. So, very, very eager for this conversation. To kick us off, tell us more about Steve Morris Coaching.
Yes, so thank you very much for the opportunity to come on here and to talk about this. So, I work with two different types of groups. I start off working with leadership teams of small to medium-sized businesses. And I bring a framework called EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, to work with leadership teams. And that's really just a simple, proven set of tools that helps a team get on the same page about where their vision is. You know, what is the vision for the business? Where are we going and how are we going to get there? Get some discipline and accountability around bringing that vision to reality, and then work together as a healthy, functional, cohesive team. And then underneath that, as I do that work, as I'm really getting to know that leadership team and helping them become their best selves as a team, oftentimes I'm seeing a group of people around the table, of course, who are individuals, and how those individuals are showing up on that leadership team. Their energy, their mindset is critical to the overall success of the team. So I also do individual one-on-one executive coaching, where I really look at, I call it mental fitness training. And once again, I use a framework called Positive Intelligence, which is an 8-week program that really helps people dial in on their mindset and transforming non-useful thinking to useful thinking so that they can be better executives and leaders for their businesses.
Beautiful. I love that, and I want for you to sort of bring us back to the very beginning of your career. Obviously, you're a seasoned professional now with decades under your belt. One thing that really interests me within your journey is that you actually begin your career with designing multi-million, basically dollar racing yachts, and basically sort of leading those high performing teams through the toughest basically yacht races. Tell me about basically how you got the pulse for leaderships and sort of basically what makes you so fascinated by it, I suppose.
Yes, so my first job out of college, Sam, so I went to college and I studied mechanical engineering.
Okay.
Right? My first job out of college, I had a job on a professional sailing team. So I went from studying engineering to being at a gym at 6 o'clock in the morning and lifting heavy weights to get strong enough to be part of this team to help get a boat ready to go sail around the world. So my first introduction, my first job right out of college, I'm working on a world-leading racing team and getting to feel what that was like and, riding all of the ups and downs of being part of a really high-performing team, figuring out how it was coming together to go do something really amazing. From that, I then came to the United States to design sailboats. And so I worked on teams, led teams, was a part of teams, helping our clients win some of the world's most demanding yacht races. I really got to learn a tremendous amount, about what it took to be a really great leader, right? We were working with Olympic class gold medal sailors. We were working with the best boat builders. We were bringing in the top university researchers all together into these teams with us as designers to come together as a team to go do something truly amazing, like win the America's Cup or win the Volvo Ocean Race. And so, as I say, I really got to learn so much about great leadership. I was on some amazing teams. We did incredible things, winning around the world yacht races. But I was also on some teams that didn't make it, despite having resources that we needed, right? And so this is really the learning moment of sort of seeing, well, this team over here, it's really great. And the feeling that I have when I go and work in this team is amazing. Everybody's got each other's backs. We're on the same page. And this team over here, it's a bit of a grind. What's going on, right? And I just didn't have the tools at the time to understand that, right? And so that has driven me. That's my passion for the last, few decades, is really how do we build truly amazing, incredible teams. And now that's what I'm passionate about that, and I study that, and then I bring this to my client groups now, is really getting the team around the table to be the best that they truly can be, to take their business to where they want to go.
That's fascinating. And I think that was such a blessing, right? For you right out of the college, being able to experience such in opportunities that most certainly don't have and typically work their whole life basically to be a part of. I suppose, how did that initially feels and fuels who you became as a human beings to be surrounded by these high performers at quite a young age, professionally speaking?
Well, there were so many aspects of this, Sam, and I as I take my memory back, I go back to, we used to do these gym training sessions. So we had this team trainer who he had been a Commonwealth Games gold medal weightlifter.
Okay.
The guy was just tough, strong, right? And so we'd be doing these very intense training sessions in the gym, and we would have to, line up and go perform some exercise or something like that. And so I found for myself, how I felt was like, okay, here's something difficult in front of me. For me, I just wanted to go in and I just wanted to get it done, get it over with. So I always got to the front of the line. I didn't want to be at the back of the line waiting to go through this difficult thing in front of us. So I like that about myself in many ways, like that thing of, okay, I've got something difficult in front of me. Let's get it. Let's get after it, right? Let's get through that. And then, sorry.
No, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I was sort of continuing this journey of yours because you serve as a certified PMP in the Navy as well. Now that's also very interesting. What are the similarities and I suppose differences to operate within sort of a public governmental basically arms compared to some of the companies you've been running with, which I would suppose they were privately held companies on the yacht side. Tell me more about basically the transitions and how that also informs basically your coaching style these days.
Right. So, as I was saying, I was working in this, yacht racing world, right? And it's a high risk environment, right? Because people want to win, right? So how close to the edge can we design a structure, right? Because all these races, they don't want to take any more weight with them around the world as they're sailing. Then, what really informed that transition, like, why did I make that shift? Well, I made that shift because I wanted to learn, how do we get a truly great group of people together to go do something really amazing? And I wasn't learning that within the yacht world that I was in.
Okay.
So I moved over to government contracting, as you said, became a PMP certified project manager, learned how to manage much larger groups of people and multi-million dollar budgets. And so this is where I really got my formal training, right? And how we can get a great group of people together to go do something amazing and help the US Navy launch ships into the fleet. But, the contrast, really, the contrast between these two environments couldn't have been greater. High risk in the yacht world, going into supporting on the government side. There is no reward for taking risks within the government world. It's a very risk-averse environment. And so I had to learn, right, how to adapt to that. And how do we still get things done that we want to get done within an environment like that? And so, what helped me really, I think, is the learning to sort of come into an environment, to see the environment, to understand that environment, and then to figure out how do we navigate our way through this. And that has really given me, I think, a strong foundation. Now, when I come to each individual one of my clients, I can, sort of take a step back, slow down a little bit, look around, understand the situation, ask questions, and then get a feel for their environment, and then chart the best way to help them navigate through to, what it is that they want to do in their business. And so, my training from these two different paths in my career now really does help me adapt to whatever's in front of me with my clients that I'm working with.
Yeah. And I suppose sort of a very important question on this, as you sort of work on both sides, like you said, basically very risky, basically environments, risk averse environments. Is that basically that inspired you to sort of transition to executive leadership coaching in the first place?
Yes. I worked in the government field for 10 years. And I always sort of had these several different interests, if you like, within that. I mean, number one is, of course, learning about how to navigate through these environments, how I can serve my government clients as best as I could. But then I was also interested within each company that I worked in, the business environment, and, what was going on within that. And I'd started off with a very, very large defense contractor. It was a huge 60,000 person company. So learning how to navigate that environment, but then how do we, develop business within that, right? How do we grow within that environment fascinated me. So I went and back to university. I did an executive MBA program so that I could learn the tools that I needed to learn to be able to work in that environment. But then after 10 years, I sort of had this hankering to kind of get back to my entrepreneurial roots, to kind of get back to something, with a little bit more flexibility and agility, and back into entrepreneurship. So I made the very difficult decision, to leave the government environment, and I started my own business. And I've been working for myself for the last 10 years, really working with all sorts of different types of leadership teams in different capacities. But it really is my true calling. I just love to be able to help a team figure out where it is they want to go, and map the fastest, smoothest route through to getting to where they want to go.
Beautiful. You talk a lot about the importance of mental fitness in leadership. That's a core sort of component to what you focus on. How do you define mental fitness, and I suppose why it is so crucial in your perspective for executive leadership?
Oh, yes. It's just, as you say, it's so crucial. When I'm working with a team, right, a group of leaders around a table, and I am asking them, as I'm saying, where is it that you want to get to with the business? What is your vision, right? And then what are the steps that you guys need to get through to get there? What I see is what that team comes up with is fundamentally tied to what's going on inside their heads in terms of how do they see the world? Do they see the world out there, their business environment that they're working in? Do they see it as a world of abundance?
Mm.
Or do they have a scarcity mindset, right? Do they see that there is enough out there and let's go get it? Or do they see there isn't enough out there? What are we going to do with the business, right? That mindset truly, informs and influences the things that they're working on as a team about growing the business. Then the second piece is that group of individuals around the table. How do they see each other as they look around the table? Their colleagues. Do they fundamentally see that everybody else around the table is doing their best, right? Everybody's doing their best. Or are they, sort of looking around the table with maybe a mindset of judgment about the other people around the table, or even the employees within their organization? And I hear it in the language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything gets created, like our thoughts, the way we see the world comes out in terms of our language. And so if I hear a leadership team or leaders, disparaging people within the business, if I hear them talking about, their people being lazy or their people, being dumb, and I've heard these things right around the leadership team table. I'm like, well, that's not a very useful mindset, right? And then finally, the third component, so how do they see the world? How do they see each other? Then how do they see themselves? This is so critical because I work with leaders, in these small to medium-sized businesses that are having to make difficult, weighty decisions every single day. And then I hear them talk about, they wake up at 2:00 in the morning worrying, did I make the right decision yesterday? Right? Worrying about, am I the right person to be doing this job?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That imposter syndrome comes up so often. And so mental fitness training is about really looking at non-useful thinking that is not helping them in how they see the world. It's not helping them in how they see other people, and it's not helping them in how they see themselves. And if we can see that thinking, like if we can just take a step back and kind of see the language, and then just the fundamental distinction is, if we can see it, we can choose our thoughts. Simple, but not easy. We can choose our thoughts, and we can choose to shift our thoughts and our language, and we can create, right? And I sincerely believe this, and I've used this for myself to, turn the direction in my life. If we can choose our thoughts and choose a more useful way of thinking, then the language, the things that we speak into the world and the things that we create are so much more positive and useful and taking a business forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's sort of this shift from a limiting to an empowering mindset, right? That's so key. And within that growth-oriented, I suppose, and empowering mindsets, what have you typically seen as the main strategy? What strategies is basically do you employ that I've seen to be most beneficial to help leader basically develop and have this? It's what I call this paradigm shift. Perhaps what's been the best use case in your case?
Well, I've got several tools in my toolbox. This is one of the things that I started off my career as an engineer, right? Engineers use tools. Anytime we have a problem in front of us, we're pulling out a tool, the best tool to work with that problem. And so as a coach, it's the same thing, right? And so sometimes, a good intervention, if somebody is like in a very disempowering mindset, is particularly if they're triggered in some way, right? And so, we've got our amygdala, right, in the back of our brain there, fight, flight, or freeze, right? Like always scanning the environment as, is this environment safe? So sometimes if I see a leadership team or a leader is in that place where they're getting triggered by what's going on in front of them, then, a first initial simple technique is just to bring them back into their body. And one of the ways that we do that with positive intelligence coaching is I just get them to start off, just bring two fingertips together and just rub them together very, very lightly. Just start feeling the texture, the ridges on your finger and your thumb, right? And so that just brings somebody's mind out of this fear, right? And we know that fear stands for future events appearing real, right? But that they're not
I love that.
here now, right? So just bring us back out of that fear into right here, right now. This is where we are in the present moment. The past is behind us. The future's out there. It's not here yet. Here's the present moment. And this is truly the only moment then we can, make a choice in what's going on. So just coming into a body, that's one technique. Another great one that I learned a few years ago from, Andrew Huberman, if you listen to the Huberman podcast, he talks about this thing called the physiological sigh. And it's a hardwired mechanism that we have in our body to bring our nervous system down. And so if you've ever seen a dog sort of like circling around, on its bed, and then it goes and sort of lies down and goes to, rest, you'll hear it go, right? And it's a double inhale with a long sigh. All of us mammals have this. And what it does, that gets our parasympathetic nervous system clutched in and can produce like this sense of calm. And so these little things, like just rubbing your fingertips together, concentrating on that, or doing you can do that anytime. You can do it when you're walking down the hallway. If you're going into like some stressful meeting that you're very worried about or anxious about, you can just be doing those breaths as you're walking down the hallway. If you're sitting at a conference room table and there's a meeting that's going sideways in front of you and you're starting to feel anxious, you can just bring those fingertips together and just back into the body, right? So these are very simple tools that just, as I say, just get out of the hamster wheel, the rat race that goes on of non-useful thinking in your mind, and just bring yourself down back into your body. And these techniques that get the parasympathetic nervous system clutched back in. So that's where I start with a couple of different techniques there, and then I can go on.
Yeah, no, it's and I love this. And you were talking about the fact that fear. And by the way, I will definitely steal that acronym from you. So that's it's too late now to for the IP. But I think it's because I think it's fantastic. And I never heard anyone say this. I heard the EGO acronym, right? Edging God's out. That one I know. But the future event appearing real, I think it's tremendous. So thank you a lot for that. But the one thing that is interesting about this fear factor, and there's incredible studies and psychologists studying that, is that you get all the way down to about 10 IQ points when you're actually in a state of fear. So not only are you obviously very unstable from an emotion standpoint, but even your capability to make rational decisions and the right decisions is wildly diminished. 10 IQ point is, for anyone wondering, is quite a significant bump down. And so that's something also that I think leaders should be aware of, is that not only being afraid doesn't serve you, but it doesn't serve anybody else, right? And from that perspective, you were discussing about some of the limiting belief that most leaders encounter, like the imposter syndrome, for example, which actually I'd love to pick your brain on this. I heard many leaders actually, or perhaps aspiring leaders, talking about the fact that actually if you have the right mindset and the right perspective, and if the imposter syndrome might be a positive sign that you're now stepping out of your comfort zone and therefore within this growing basically sort of phase. What's your opinion on all of that? And perhaps how do you best manage the imposter syndrome?
Yes, so that's an interesting perspective. Is the imposter syndrome useful? I need to think about that too, I think. Definitely, though, in working with, leaders and businesses, we sort of look at this in sort of certain aspects. So, the pressure, right? The amount of pressure that somebody is feeling or stress, really is kind of relative to, their capabilities and their ability to be able to deal with a situation. Because what one person finds or thinks is a highly stressful situation, another person might be just like, well, this is a walk in the park, right?
Right.
And so you can plot, sort of a curve, if you like, of pressure and performance. And so, if you ratchet up pressure for some people, if you're not feeling any pressure, right, then probably we're not getting the best performance out of ourselves as leaders, right? When in fact, most entrepreneurs, most of my clients that I work with, being entrepreneurs, right, if they're not being challenged enough, they're bored.
Yep.
Right. And boredom anywhere in an organization is dangerous because stuff starts getting out of whack pretty quickly when we've got bored people around. So we want to increase the pressure enough that we really kind of get people, into a flow zone, right, where they are really truly in their unique ability. Stuff's coming in and they're dealing with it and they're getting decisions made, stuff's moving along, and everything's really, running, as I say, in this flow zone, and you're getting energy, right? You're not getting depleted by working in the flow zone. Time stands still, and you just got it. But then if we start ratcheting up the pressure more, then we start getting out of somebody's real capacity to be able to do their work. And then the stress does start coming in, then the overwhelm, and the balls start getting dropped, and that we're waking up at 2:00 in the morning worrying and things like that. So there's a curve between pressure and performance, and we want to be right there in the middle in that flow zone. And if we're getting too far out, on too much pressure relative to our abilities, then we've got to do something about that. And that's where this mental fitness training comes in, because sometimes, another technique, right, that I work on with my clients is, if we are in a stressful situation, being able to reframe that situation, right, to be able to look at it from a different way that can reduce the stress. One of those things, one of the sort of an inside coaching technique, if you like, is to normalize things for people, right? If they're feeling stressed, then just to say, this is normal, right? This conflict that you're having on the team is normal. This is what happens with passionate leadership teams, is we have some conflict. So don't worry about it so much. We want to have healthy conflict in the team, and there's things to work on there, but that can relieve the pressure. Or just to say that, to know sometimes, if marketing's not producing the leads and sales are down, or something's going on in the external environment. Well, this is normal. Everybody goes through these things. And then let's just figure out what we're going to do about it. And that normalization can bring the stress level down for somebody, so that they're back into their zone of, okay, I've got this. I know how to, I know what I can do about sort of, figuring out my way through this situation here. So, being able to deal with that pressure and performance, I think is another, I almost view it as like surfing in the business, right? And you're sort of like, as I say, if everybody's sitting around bored, then we need to ratchet up the pressure here a little bit, and we need to kind of, get things going, because I don't think any business achieves its ultimate success with a bunch of people sitting around underutilized and bored.
Oh, 100%. Look at look at federal employees. But from that perspective, Steve, it's one thing that I found, and I think you're entirely right, is that actually the best teams are one that can have those discussions or hard discussions, and doing that basically as often as it necessary, basically for the well-being of the business. I found that the opposites, people that don't talk to each other because they might be afraid of having these discussions or stressed out this discussion, that's where disconnections actually happens. Because, and I think that you can relate that to pretty much any relationship, right? Think of any relationship you're having right now in your life, all the relationship that you're just meh about, you're trying to this sort of in the in-between zone. Chris Williamson was talking about that on his show, Modern Wisdom, excuse me. And he was talking about the fact that sometimes a worse situation is better than a better one, because if it's right in between this phase where it's not really good, but it's not that bad either, like you said, you come to a point where your action reflects a states of I suppose, contempt, and that could be very, very dangerous from a business standpoint, because as we know, if your business is not growing, it is shrinking just the way it is. Stability in business is actually sort of a mental myth that human beings have. And within all of that, though, Steve, one concept, you referred to it prior to this podcast, but I'd love to sort of pick your brain, is positive intelligence. And I'm quoting you here: by starting with self-awareness and compassion, I help you uncover who you are at your core. That's a direct quote from you. Tell me more about what you mean by that, and how positive intelligence serves you in that regards.
Yes, so thank you for asking me about that. It's a key thing. So, what I see and what I believe and what I coach in is, as we grow up, and especially as we kids, right? You're born, a young baby, a young child, 1 or 2 years old, right? Just lives in its world of authentic selfness, right? Just shows up in the world. This is who I am. But then, I think as we sort of grow up, going through school and things, we get these messages, you show up into the world as you are, and then you get some reflection comes back and somebody makes a comment, or, these things sort of harden us up a little bit, and we start to put on layers because we realize, well, last time I showed up as my authentic self, I got laughed at. I got shamed, I got bullied or something like that. So, we just sort of go through this process, unfortunately, of kind of layering up through life. And Gino Wickman, who, founded EOS 20 years ago, came and talked with us in the EOS community about sort of his realization around this, that he developed EOS worldwide, built it up, sold it. As he says, he rang the bell of entrepreneurial success, had all the money he needed in the world. He was good, except he wasn't, except that he found that he was actually now deeply unhappy inside. And what he really started sort of looking at is, he had been living this persona of a successful entrepreneur. And that persona had been layering up, who he felt he needed to be to the outside world, right? And this happens to myself. It happens to all of us. It's a normal thing that we sort of feel like, oh, we have to be a certain type of person and we can't be our true self. So in coaching, those things get in our way, right? Because people start having a story about themselves in their head. I'm not good at this thing. I could never do that, and I hear it so often with adults, like, I'm not a creative person, or I'm not good at math, or I'm terrible at public speaking, right? Or I'm not a leader.
Right.
I'm not a salesperson. Like, people have these stories in their heads. And so, the coaching process is really just about, looking at these things and, from the outside perspective to be able to maybe challenge those. And is this really true, right, about you, these stories that you have? Because my clients, if they want to do something, they want to grow their business or they want to change their career, they want to be able to free themselves up to be in that place where they're in their unique ability. What are these limiting stories and what are these limiting mindsets that get in the way? And in positive intelligence, we look at what we call them saboteurs. So it's this judging mindset, right? These little thoughts that come into our mind where we start beating ourselves up or we start judging others, right? And those stories, those judgments, those negative thoughts are not useful. And they get in the way of us, truly showing up with the way we'd like to show up and making the best decisions, having the best interactions that we can with the people around us. So the coaching is really about going through a process of identifying, like, let's just get all that stuff written down. Let's start seeing this stuff. Oh my gosh, when I say this thing, when I, beat myself up, it's so often, right? I mean, I've done it myself. Like you knock over a glass or something like that on the table. I'll say, Steve, you stupid idiot, right? Oh, I'm not a stupid idiot. It was an accident, right? I didn't intentionally mean to knock over the glass, right? But it's just, we say these things on such an automatic basis. And so the key thing is to be able to start seeing these. When we can start seeing them, then we can get a little bit of distance from it. And then, as I've said before, it's then the mental fitness training. So just like training to go run a marathon or anything else, it's getting the reps in to build a better way of thinking. And instead of saying, Steve, you stupid idiot for knocking over a glass, it would be like, oh, well, I didn't mean to do that. Let's just, get it cleaned up and it's no big deal, move on, right? And I don't end up like beating myself up over, a little bit of spilled water or something. It's a simple example, but, it extrapolates all the way through business decisions, business interactions, and as you were talking about before, personal interactions, right? Because being in relationship with other people, being able to have more useful interactions with people ultimately helps us serve others better and, have a more peaceful, joyful life, I believe.
Sure. Yeah. One thing that you're talking about, which is very interesting, it's sort of the Tony Robbins framework, which is sort of identity following. What I mean by that is that we're tribal people by nature, and therefore, when you're assigning basically these things upon yourself, I'm not a public speaker, I'm not a salesperson. Well, that's from an intrinsic standpoint, will not only influence your behaviors, but also will unfortunately negatively impact your ability to become one if you had such a desire. You always give the example of the smoker, right? If you're not clear about your identity, your chance of having addictive behaviors are way higher because again, you're way more unstable. So it was sharing the fact that if you want to actually stop smoking, start to identify yourself as not a smoker. I'm not a smoker, and therefore, from that perspective, my behavior are reflected. One other thing that you talk at length about, Steve, which actually is pretty heavily debated on this podcast, which I love, just great minds sort of having different opinions on a singular topic, is this concept of achieving work-life balance for a leader. You were talking about the EOS founder, Mr. Gino, and how he seemed from the outside to have everything a man could desire, but internally that was not the case for him prior to making this change. Tell me more about how does one achieve personal fulfillment while contributing to their personal and professional, success?
No, it's certainly as you say, heavily debated, and oftentimes when I start working with clients, yes, there's this question of like work-life balance and what does that look like? So in EOS, in the work that I do, we talk about this thing called the EOS life. And the EOS life has 5 components to it. Number 1 is doing work that you love, right? And so this is where I'm really talking about getting into your flow zone, your unique ability. What are the things that you truly love doing? Because that gives you energy. The second component is with people you love, right? So the people around you, like, is this a team that you really want to work with? And does, interacting with them, as you say, sort of fulfill you, right? And is a positive thing. Third component is making a dent in the universe. So doing impactful, meaningful, purposeful things in the world. So are you doing those sorts of things? I think because when you are doing things with purpose and meaning, once again, this is something that's fulfilling, right? And energizing. The fourth component is being compensated appropriately. And so, generally working with my entrepreneurial clients, like we're here in business, to do something really great, but we are also entrepreneurs and we want to get a return, an appropriate return for our time, our effort, our passion, our investment that we're putting into the business. And then the fifth and final component is having time for other passions, right?
Okay.
And so this is so important because, as I'm working with my busy entrepreneurs who are building their businesses and now they're finding themselves getting sucked into the business and, now I'll just go work a Saturday. It won't be a big deal. And now they're there on Sunday afternoon and, soon the business takes over their whole life. And now they start, having difficulty with personal relationships because they're not available there to show up. They're not, I live here in Colorado, right? It's like people want to go mountain biking. They want to go skiing. They want to go hiking. They want to do other things, other passions. And so, if you're just so head down running like heck in the business that you're not getting any time for your other passions in life, then you feel like your work-life balance is certainly not balanced, right? It's off center. So those 5 components, doing work you love with people you love, making a dent in the universe, getting compensated appropriately, and having time for other passions is a framework that any of us can look at and say, 1 to 5, 5 being best, where am I today? All right, I'm a 4 out of 5 on doing work I love. I'm a 4 out of 5 on what people I love, but I'm only a 3 out of 5 on making a dent in the universe. So what is it that I could do to tweak the business? Or maybe I might want to go and get involved in a nonprofit and do some service related work to feed my sense of making a dent in the universe. And I really feel like, when you get to like being like a 4 or a 5 out of 5 on each one of those questions I asked, I feel like most of my entrepreneurial clients would feel like they're in the zone and they have that work-life balance, because typically they're not people who, want to sit around on the couch and eat Doritos all day. They're entrepreneurs. We're doing stuff.
Oh yeah, no, it's you were talking about boredom. The every entrepreneur that I know, if they're bored, they're running in circle. All right, they're just sort of contemplating what can we do. That's just how our brain are wired. You were talking about EOS and this sort of framework. I really want, and I am sure you have plenty of them, but if you could pick one that is sort of a great case studies, and you can sort of give me more details upon basically the implementation of the AOS process for the success basically of such company. Do you have any tangible example that we might be able to sort of analyze together?
Oh my gosh, well, I've got so many of them because every single one of my client teams I work with has its unique reason why they want to engage in the EOS process.
Absolutely.
So some examples are a leadership team. It's a family-owned business. The person in the visionary role in the business wants to retire in 5 years, right? But it's been a small business, and that individual has just been doing everything, right? And so, wanting to transition and eventually sort of sell the business, well, the business will be worth a lot more with a leadership team that can, demonstrably lead and run the business, right? Because now we've got an entity that somebody, can acquire and know that that business is now going to give them a return on their investment. And so this is a very common thing where we've got a founder or owner of the business who's the rainmaker. They've got everything in their head. They know how to do it all. But if we take that person out of the business falls apart. So building a leadership team. So this is what I've been working on with one of my clients, is really being able to establish responsible, capable, rock star individuals who are, leading the marketing and sales effort. They've got the operations, and someone's, taking care of all of the finance and things like that. So freeing up the visionary, the owner, founder of the business, to truly work on the things they want to do, but then also to have a defined path that they can slowly step out of the business over time. So that's one very tangible and quite common project that I work on with my clients. Another one can be for new partners coming together into a business and just really trying to figure out, what are our roles and who does have what, and without having a sort of an idea about how they can structure the business. There's just a lot of overlap happening. There's a lot of dropped balls happening because people aren't clear about what their roles are. And I sometimes, the analogy for me is a bunch of 6-year-olds playing soccer, right? I mean, you put the ball on the field and everybody's chasing the ball, right? And it's just like this big clump of people chasing the ball around the field. But then as you mature, right, and you get more skills and you grow, then people realize, it's actually more effective if we stay in our positions and then we pass the ball and then we can actually win the game, right? And so we do the same thing in business, right? Just get everybody into their right positions so everybody knows, what they're accountable for. One of the tools that we start off in the very first day of working together is developing what I call the accountability chart. And it's not an organization chart, because an organization chart is about titles, and titles have ego wrapped around them. Yeah, I'm the director of marketing, right? Okay, so instead we talk about accountability. We have a function, it's marketing, okay? And this function is accountable for creating strategy, executing the strategy, bringing in leads, right? That's what the marketing function is accountable for. And so we've got to get crystal clear. Who's accountable? Who's got this, right? Who is sitting here at the leadership team table, who is accountable for producing marketing, leads into the business, right? So we get real clear about that. And so oftentimes, this is, as I start working with clients, getting crystal clear about all of the function, all of the work that needs to get done in the business and who's got it, is one of these life-changing things, that when I start working with the team, that knowledge, people just want to know, what is it that I need to be doing today? How can I, help the company succeed in the long term? And so just creating that clarity around what it is, that Sarah needs to be doing and that Joe needs to be doing in the business is life-changing for a lot of leadership teams. So those are a couple of examples.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And one thing I want to get deeper with you on is definitely resilience. Resilience and sort of embracing opportunities. We live in a world now where everything moves extremely fast, and I'll go as far as saying that probably 80 to 90 people are completely reactive for diverse reasons. One, because they might not have the bandwidth to be proactive. And there's sometimes great reasons. There's sometimes a reason that we can definitely just basically justify and I suppose move forward a better outcomes in that regards. Now, this is where I think that from our perspective, especially as you are an executive coach, I'm really want to get more familiar with sort of what you're doing from a basically not only the mindset shift, which we talk a lot about, but sort of the necessity to recognize and seize new opportunities That's one of the key differentiator, in my opinion, between leaders and followers. And Steve Jobs was talking about that a lot when he was still with us. Rest in peace. The objective basically of such a process is quite is very numerous in layers, because there's a portion of it which is, again, having the resilience to be able to go through these storms. But then afterwards, when we actually get out of it and we finally see the sun, then how can we basically have the tools in place to actually seize that next big opportunities that could be company changing? Tell me more about the dynamics that needs to occur there and what you see as most performing in your experience.
Wow. Well, we could talk for hours about this.
Oh, for sure.
For sure. So if I could take it at a couple of different levels. So, number one is in terms of sort of like the company, right? So the leadership team and, a leadership team group being able to seize opportunities. In EOS, I have a very specific framework for doing this in terms of, helping that leadership team really get on the same page about long-term, where are we going with this business? And we set like a 10-year target. It's what Jim Collins called the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. All right, where are we going? Like, we're at 20 million now. In 10 years, we're going to be a $200 million business. All right, set that BHAG out there. And then we bring it down closer to the ground. We set what we call a 3-year picture. So 3 short years from now, what is the company going to look like? And we just use 5 to 15 bullet points to paint a picture. Because when people, a picture's 1,000 words, right? So when we can paint a picture and people can kind of see, right, that's the compass heading for where we are going 3 short years from now. And we bring it closer to the ground in terms of, what do we need to get done this year? We make a 1-year plan with 3 to 7 goals, not 23, not 37, just 3 to 7. And I think this speaks to what you're asking about in terms of resilience, because if we set 37 goals for this year, everybody's overwhelmed. They don't know what they should be doing tomorrow, and we ultimately don't get there. So we really simplify it, and we really get crystal clear. If you've just got to get 3 things done this year, what are the 3 most important things you're going to get done this year that get you to that 3-year picture and on to your 10-year goal, right? And so, and then in EOS, so the resilience piece of this is having set that 3-year picture. That stuff's all out there, right? And we're just going to take this one bite at a time, and don't get overwhelmed. Right. And even taking that 1-year picture and 1-year plan I'm talking about, we bring this down to every quarter. So we'll set 3 to 7 priorities. We call them rocks, right? These are the big things that we need to tackle in the business every quarter. And it just helps people not get overwhelmed. It does keep them resilient because we're going to set 3 to 7 for this quarter. And we do this at the beginning of every quarter. And then I come back at the end of the quarter, and it's like we look back and how did you do? And I coached my teams to get to 80, completing 80% or more of their rocks, right? And then we get the dopamine hit. Okay, we set 5 rocks and we got 4 out of 5 of them done, 80%. Yay! Congratulations to the team. It helps them build their resilience as a team, because maybe they might have a down quarter the next quarter. They only get 3 out of 5 rocks done. Well, you're not failures as a team, right? Last quarter you got, previous quarter you got 4 out of 5 done. You're a good team. It was just a tough quarter. Let's, get back up on our feet, get back on track and plan our next quarter. So we just break it down into bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
I think then if I could answer it, at the individual level then, right? Because I think that this is important too. For me, as I was talking about at the very beginning of this podcast, like seeing a leadership team as a group of individuals who are showing up around the table, with their energy, with their mindset, this is a fundamental place that we need to look at resilience as well, right? Energy, right? So if you're not sleeping well, if you're not, eating good food, fueling your body correctly, if you're not exercising, maintaining, your physical fitness and things, you are not going to be in your best place with your energy, right? And when you're tired and hungry, and exhausted, you're not going to be making the best decisions for the business. In fact, you probably find yourself, on the edges of your window of tolerance, and, something goes sideways in the business and you react badly, right? Say something you regret saying to somebody, to your best, operations person, and they say, I'm out of here. I'm not doing this anymore. You just lost your best person, right? So resilience to me is really looking inside yourself as a leader and taking care of yourself from a fundamental place. And so on my website at stevemorriscoaching.com, I have a free course. It's called Create Your Morning of Distinction. And there are just 10 steps in this course. They're like 5 minutes each. This is not, a big, long program, but it is truly just like 10 things. If you pick and choose, in the morning, do something to manage your energy, manage your nutrition, manage your mindset, so that you can truly be stepping into what you're being called to do as a leader of a business, and to be, a steward and a shepherd for that business. Work on yourself, and, there's no better time than that to do that than the beginning of the day. So you set off on the right course for the day.
Absolutely. And one of the very interesting thing with all of that, you're describing sort of an ideal morning routine, ideal basically resilience mindsets. To me, the reason why that's so key for leaders, and that's the bulk of our audience, is that those have ripple effects, not only on yourself, but everybody within the organization. And that's something that we don't want to underestimate, because there's sort of this, I heard this, I always have this fantastic mentality. I probably took it from Marcus Aurelius, but you cannot basically pour from an empty cup, right? That's the bottom line. And
Sure.
very, a lot of people, specifically people that are entrepreneurs, that have this sort of tendency to go above and beyond at all time. Well, that may be tolerable here and there, and you might get some great dopamine hit from doing more, but there will be a point of exhaustion. That's just the case for human beings. And for all the youngsters out there like myself, we don't feel like that is the truth, because we're sort of superheroes in our stage. We're sort of having this sort of an egotistical understanding that everything is possible, and perhaps you're right, but it's possible within the right plan, and anything is possible, but not everything is possible. Perhaps the best way to look at it. And from that perspective, I'd really love basically to pick your brain about that ripple effect, and from an organization culture standpoint, making sure that the leaders understand just how vital it is, not only for themselves, but for their company as a whole.
Yeah. Well, one definition of the culture of an organization is it is the collective mindsets of everybody in the organization, right? So going back to what I said before, how, mindset being, how do you see the world? How do you see each other? How do you see yourself? And so if you think about the collectiveness of that with a group of people, and I'm sure you've seen this, Sam, right? But I mean, some organizations you walk into and like, what's the conversation like around the water cooler, right? Are people showing up around the water cooler and, complaining about the ubiquitous they, right?
Right.
The they that do this, the they that, people judging the decisions, back channeling things like that. There's a culture around that. Gossip. Oh my gosh. I've had a client who, had to deal with this problem of endemic gossip in their business. People saying things about each other. And so, that's a cultural thing. And so, to what we call to be able to get to an intentional culture for your organization, right? The leaders really need to be able to step in and, nip that stuff in the bud and say, this is not who, that is not who we are as a team, right? To be the leader of the organization, to demonstrate through their actions, right? And then through their language, through their thinking, what the positive culture of the organization truly is. So, that ripple effect, like, we talk in the EOS as well about being a great leader of an organization is like being a great parent. And there's a lot of similarities between great parenting and great leadership. And, having a few rules, doing what you say you're going to do, walking the talk, all of these things, the kids are always looking at the parents, right? What are the parents doing, right? And so when you want to create a truly intentional, great culture of an organization, it starts with the leaders. And the leaders have to demonstrate what it looks like. They have to walk the talk, and they have to show up, right, with their best, most useful mindsets. And as you're talking about, and the ripples of that will go through the organization.
Beautiful. Steve, what's next for you, and what do you think is next for the future of executive leadership coaching?
Well, it's the things I'm truly passionate about, as I've talked about with you, Sam, truly looking at mindset and energy of leadership teams coming to the table. And so I do this in a number of different ways, but principally, through working with leadership teams and then also individuals. But I'm also creating a retreat place on my farm in Colorado where leaders are going to come and get reconnected with each other, what's going on inside, getting grounded with what's going on in their lives and their business. That's what I'm passionate about. That's in progress for this year. In the meantime, I'm putting courses and talks and information up on my website at stevemorriscoaching.com.
Well, Mr. Steve Morris, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on our podcast. Thank you so much for joining. And to me, the best leaders are those in which are able to listen and make others listen to them. It's a very interesting art, and one that we must discuss at length, because that's how great things happens. I would really appreciate if you could share some last words of wisdom with our audience.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. I hear there's a phrase you hear a lot, right? That happiness is an inside job.
Yes.
I would say leadership is an inside job. And every great leader needs to look in the mirror at the person in front of them and really go deep on who would I have to be? Who am I being? How am I showing up to be a great leader of my organization, of the people around me, of my family, and, truly look inside, because that's where everything happens.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.